A memo is not a law. A memo is less binding than a treaty, and the United States doesn't care about treaties, right? The Treaty of Guadalupe, the treaty with the Native Americans, it's soft law, right? A memo guides the administrative agencies as to how to act, right? Which means it's basically their policy, right? Their guidelines, right? And this is why I've been telling you Americans, right, that putting the administrative agency, the policy making bodies under the executive, a non policy making body, having their obedience be POTUS, that agenda was a bad idea, right? I told all of you, Joe Biden had the authority to pressure the archivist to publish the Equal Rights Amendment into the Constitution, but he didn't. Now, it doesn't matter because shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? But for the future, I need you to understand that this whole idea of the Constitution authorizing lawmaking only to Congress and then them saying, hey, policy making body under the president is unconstitutional. Is unconstitutional. Unless that constitution changes, it is unconstitutional. Not that it matters. I'm not saying this because I think it's going to change anything, but I need you to understand because this Federalist 28 says what? The obstacles to usurpation, so violation from the government from a country, and the facilities or resistance against it increase with the increased extent of the government, provided the citizens understand their rights and are disposed to defend them. The natural strength of the people in a large community in proportion to the artificial strength of the government is greater than in a small and of course more competent who will struggle with the attempts of the government to establish a tyranny, right? Right? So you need to understand that this is not how it is supposed to work. There's a difference between political status quo and constitutional status quo. If the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, what this federal government is relying on is you believing their argument that they can do whatever they want because the federal is above the state. That's not always true, and our fundamental texts prove that. The fact that they think our fundamentals is like the Bible and they can pick and choose, that's their problem. But truth is in our fundamentals, right? And a lot of people do not research them, and they do not believe that people would even go and check whether they're saying the truth, right? But a memo is not a law. And I know I may eventually get caught up, right? But this is why you have to pressure your state governor, if you're in a blue state, that they have to choose between the feds and the citizens, right? Because remember, the Polish government handed over 3.3 million Jews, right? 3 million of them never returned. And the United States, there were state governments who handed over Japanese Americans for the internment camps. There was, states and the United States, including California, who allowed the federal agents to kidnap Mexican heritage Americans and deport them to Mexico. Over 60% of those deported under the Mexican Repatriation Act during the Great Depression were obviously U.S. citizens, right? This is a repetition, and because of that, that is why certain states, particularly California, who is 40% Latino, has that authority to maximum lawful force upon certain satisfaction of events, right? That event in California is going to be federal agents harming permanently a U.S. citizen during one of their operations, right? I'm sure that's when Newsom is going to have to choose, right? But ultimately, we have to understand that a memo is not legally binding. And if you obey in advance, you're allowing for people who would be fighting for you to be picked early, right? We have to ensure that they cannot tell the difference between people because what? First they came for X, but the federal is above the state, but eventually they're going to come for you, and then who's going to protest for you? And that's the thing. We're not learning because we think that we're special. But this is a blueprint that has happened for a long time. Utilizing treason and, overthrowing the government as a reason to quell dissent, that's not new. That's not new. The White Rose, what happened to the White Rose? They literally wrote texts about, their dissent, sourcing it from history, sourcing it from philosophy, and they were... The only reason that I was impacted by my primary being permanently banned is because I know it's one step closer to me being on the radar. In history, they've thrown influencers of politics over a plane into the ocean to stop your influencing, right? They've enforced disappeared you because why? What's the purpose of enforced disappearances? Because if no one knows who took you, they don't know to blame, right? If they don't have a body, they cannot blame anyone. They cannot prosecute anyone, right? You cannot tie it to the govy. That's the purpose of not knowing where the person taken is. Because you're outside of the law. There's a gray zone because there's no evidence. You need to understand that's massive national non-compliance of this memo is critical to protecting Americans.